Unfortunately, I don't have some little talk squirreled away that I can just pull out in case of emergencies and then look so brilliant because I'm speaking off the top of my head. Today I will be speaking off the top of my head. And so the question is, what do you say when you have nothing to say? So I think what I'll start with today is to talk a little bit about how I put a presentation together. How does the muse, if you will, inspire me? And usually I find that it's something someone says, something I hear on television, something that's going on in the world. And there have been several topics that have spurred my interest, if you will. I thought, I'll do something on the need for speed. So you may hear that someday about how our ideas of what is good is what is fast. And I will probably talk a little bit about a contractor that I knew in the Albany area who used to build one, maybe two houses a year. And he did a lot of the work himself. He was very fussy about what he did. He made an excellent living on two houses a year, and he was very much in demand because for him, speed was not the answer. So that topic is going around in my head a little bit. I hear things, I read things. I read just the other day about the fact that while we all may have some Neanderthal DNA in our DNA, that it's probably only the X side of the DNA because the Y part has died off or did not survive. And I thought, that could be an interesting topic, especially if we want to talk about the rights of women and so on. So once I get onto a topic, then I sort of roll it over and over in my mind. And I think today I'd like to expand on one topic that I haven't done a lot of research on. So what I'm going to speak to you probably is just, maybe you might say, from my heart. I was watching a television program, and they were talking about this horrific accident that had happened on the highway. Basically, if I remember it correctly, the police were chasing a felon. And as he flew down the road, he crossed the center line and was headed straight for another car, and they crashed head-on. Fortunately, the driver of the other car survived with only some minor bruises. And they were interviewing him afterwards about this miraculous fact that he had not died in this horrific crash. And I expected to hear him say, God was with me. God took care of me. God saved me. And he didn't. What he said was, I'm sitting here behind the wheel, I'm driving along, and all of a sudden I see this car coming at me. Now there was no time at that point to swerve off the road. Applying the brakes wasn't going to do anything. This car was going to hit him. Now I was in an automobile accident. Jim and I and our daughter, we were coming home from picking up my daughter from work. We didn't want her to drive because it was supposed to be slippery. And we hit black ice. We weren't going very fast, probably maybe 30 miles an hour at most. And we hit a tree. And I remember seeing that tree, and we were headed for that tree, and there was nothing that was going to stop it. And it was like all in slow motion. it was going to happen, and you get to, and what's flashing through your mind is all the things that maybe you could do so you wouldn't hit that tree, but it's all, of course, happening so fast that you know that there is nothing that's going to stop that movement towards that tree. Well, this gentleman was speaking in the sense that was what was happening. What could he do at that point? You hope that the engineers who designed this car that you're in have been wise enough to design a car that's going to withstand this kind of a jolt, front-end jolt. You can hope that the guy who put the bolts in put the right bolt in the right place, and that he tightened it down the way it needed to be tightened down. And you can hope that your seat, your airbag is going to inflate when it should. And you can hope that your seat belt isn't going to tear loose. But there's really nothing you can do. And they said to the man, what were you thinking at that point when you're about to, and he said, I expected him to say, I prayed to Jesus, or Jesus was going to save me, or prayed to God. And he said, I said, help me, Jesus, because that was all I had. And I thought that was very interesting, because the way he said this, it struck me that this was not a religious man. This was not someone who put his faith in a religion, or felt that a religion was going to improve his life, or was going to make all that difference, or that Jesus was even going to save him. But he said, I said, help me, Jesus, because that was all I had. And I thought about that a little bit. And I thought about being in a situation where you get into a situation in your life where there is nothing you can do. Where do you turn? And when you look at the spiritual side of things, maybe at some point the spiritual is all you have left. I'm not even going to say that the spiritual in the sense that it has to be a Christian spiritual, or that it has to be a Hindu spiritual, but there is something beyond ourselves that we can grasp onto. Now, it doesn't say that it's going to save us. It doesn't say it's going to make us. It's not to say that he survived that crash because he did that. Very probably he survived that crash because the engineers knew what they were doing, and the guy who had to screw in the bolt had done his job, and the seat belt worked, and the airbag worked. But it made me stop and think, maybe there is a point in our life when all of those things, there's nothing we can do about it. And we're all alone, and the only thing we have is that spiritual understanding, or that spiritual connection. And I do believe that it's there, and that sometimes we can connect with it. And it doesn't have to, it's never, to me, I think it's never a formal connection. You know, we talk about meditating, and you have to sit in a certain position, which I never quite understood why I couldn't cross my legs when I was meditating. Instead, I have to sit there with my feet flat on the ground. That we look at something. We'd say, well, I've got to lose myself. I've got to sit here, and I've got to stop thinking, and I've got to lose myself in order for something else to come in. And I've always found that a little strange, because if I lose myself, then how can I myself get in contact with something else? I don't think that spiritual is like that. I think spiritual is like this man was facing. Jesus helped me, because there wasn't anything else. You know, he wasn't talking about his life flashing in front of his face. He wasn't talking about all the things that he was going to try and do to escape this. But he was there in that moment, and there was nothing else, and there was nothing but the spiritual. That's something else that we can cling to. I can't describe it. I have no idea what it is. I have no idea. You know, I'm sure this may not be particularly scientific, although I sometimes have a problem with scientific. I read a very interesting article just recently, and in one of the comments in the article was talking about the absolute scientific certainty that was the fact that black people were inferior. And it was a scientific, proven thing. And this was back 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So I love science, and I think it's very good, although just an aside, my science experiments were never particularly wonderful, and I think I blew up my beaker in my first chemistry lab and so on. So I may be a little jaded when it comes to science, but I think that there is something else. And so as I thought about doing a presentation, thinking about what that man said, I was watching another television program, and the news came on, and there was a young woman who was at the funeral of her young son who had been lost in the woods and died. And the mother was saying, well, you know, it was God had another plan. It was God's will that this happened. And it filled me with a great sadness, because I don't think God works that way. And I think that we are brought up to believe that he does. And so we are brought up, our heart is aching, and what I really felt was in this mother's heart was she wanted to say, why did that happen to my kid? And why did somebody do that? You know, why was my child lost? Why was it me? And I'm sure she really wanted to curse God, but she was brought up and taught that you don't do that you have to accept what God does to you. And I wanted to say to her, please don't. You don't have to do that. You can be angry if you want to be. That God doesn't work that way. That the spiritual doesn't work that way. Now, I sincerely hope, as a mother, that when that little child died, that there was something there to comfort her. Not rational, perhaps, not a rational thought on my part, but that's what I would like. That's what I believe. And that the spiritual doesn't demand that you say, well, that's okay. This terrible thing happened, and you know, somehow I'm going to feel better because I feel that God, you know, that God really has other plans. To me, that's very sad. To me, it's very sad when someone stands up and says, you know, 47 other people died in that plane crash, and I didn't because God was with me. It doesn't work that way. I think there is a spiritual, but it's very different than those things would have us believe. And so now I've come to the end of all I have to say, and unfortunately, you know, they say when you're giving a talk, the beginning should be very, very solid, and the end should be very, very solid, and what you say in the middle doesn't really matter too very much. And unfortunately, because this is not a prepared talk, I don't have a really super duper end to put on this, except to say that whether you're a Christian or a Hindu or an atheist or an agnostic or Muslim, that to believe that there is something beyond you is very comforting and should not be laughed at and should not be put down. It should be a part of who we are. Thank you very much.
Yeah.